January. The countryside near Naples lies quiet, blanketed in a cold stillness that seems to hold its breath. In the middle of empty fields, a king points toward the horizon and declares, "Here, I want the biggest palace in Europe." This is not just any palace. This is the Palace of Caserta, Europe's largest mansion, a dream on paper that towers over Versailles itself. It boasts more rooms than some towns have people, fountains that dance with light, gardens stretching beyond the eye's reach, and staircases that seem to rise straight from the heavens. But as you draw closer, the grandeur fades into something darker. To build this colossal monument, money must come from somewhere. Taxes rise, peasants toil harder for less bread, and the court in Naples grows more corrupt and fearful of its own people. The palace is no mere home. It is a fortress against revolt, a symbol of power and control. Decades later, armies march through its vast halls. Foreign kings, invaders, secret deals, and candlelight fill its rooms. During World War II, soldiers sleep where princes once danced, and bombs fall near gardens once designed for royal promenades. Today, tourists see only perfect marble reflected in calm waters. They do not see the fear, the debts, or the broken lives hidden within these walls. So, the real question remains, when a palace grows this huge, this heavy, this expensive, does it protect a kingdom or slowly crush it? If you enjoy deep investigations into Gilded Age architecture and the families who built it, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which house to explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. January 1752. King Charles of Bourbon stands in an empty field 20 miles north of Naples. The ground beneath his feet is soft, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and distant salt water. Around him, architects unroll drawings on makeshift tables, struggling against the wind. Charles is 35 years old, having ruled Naples and Sicily for 17 years, and he wants something Europe cannot ignore. "This is where we build," he says, pointing at nothing. The architects exchange uneasy glances. Their boots sink slightly into the wet ground. One of them, Luigi Vanvitelli, steps forward. He is 52, experienced, and not easily impressed, but even he seems uncertain. "Your Majesty." Vanvitelli begins carefully. The site is substantial. Charles smiles knowingly. What Vanvitelli means is that the site is a swamp. The nearest town is small. There are no roads strong enough to carry the stone they will need, no quarries nearby, and no workforce ready to start tomorrow. But that is not the point. "This is where we build," he says, pointing at nothing. The point is Versailles. Charles grew up hearing stories of Versailles. His family whispered about it at dinner, measured their own palaces against it, and always came up short. For decades, Versailles has been the standard, the symbol, the proof that France is the greatest power in Europe. Charles wants to change that, not by war, not by diplomacy, but by architecture. He wants a palace bigger than Versailles, with more rooms, longer facades, and gardens that stretch farther than the eye can follow. He wants foreign ambassadors to arrive, see the building, and understand immediately that Naples is not a minor kingdom playing at power. Naples is real. Naples is permanent. Naples can build something Versailles cannot match. "This is where we build," he says, pointing at nothing. Vanvitelli understands this. By now, he has spent months refining the designs. On paper, the palace is breathtaking. 5 floors, 1,200 rooms, 4 courtyards arranged in perfect symmetry, a grand staircase rising in a slow theatrical curve, fountains fed by an aqueduct stretching miles into the mountains. It is a masterpiece of control and spectacle. But standing here in the cold January wind, looking at empty fields and distant hills, Van Vitelli knows the truth. This project will take decades. It will cost a fortune Naples does not have. It will require labor on a scale the kingdom has never organized before, and it will start now. Charles signs the decree that afternoon. Construction begins within weeks. "This is where we build," he says, pointing at nothing. At first, it feels possible. Stone arrives from quarries near Caserta and beyond. Workers come from surrounding villages, drawn by promises of steady pay. Van Vitelli sets up workshops, sketches plans for every floor, every room, every decorative detail. Carpenters, masons, sculptors, all find space in the growing forest of scaffolding, but the swamp fights back. The foundation work takes longer than expected. Water seeps into excavation sites. Workers fall sick. Costs rise. The original budget is exceeded before the first walls reach their full height. Charles does not slow down. He raises taxes. He borrows money from Neapolitan banks and foreign lenders. He pressures nobles to contribute funds as gestures of loyalty. The message is clear. This palace will be built no matter the cost. This is where we build, he says, pointing at nothing. Back in Naples, people begin to notice. Bread prices climb. Taxes on goods, land, and trades all increase. The royal court issues new fees for licenses, legal documents, and things that used to be free. In the countryside near Caserta, a stonecutter named Antonio hears about the project. He is 32 with a wife, a young daughter, and debts from a bad harvest 2 years ago. The palace sounds like an opportunity. He walks to the construction site on a cold morning in early spring. Hundreds of men are already there, hauling stone, digging trenches, building wooden scaffolding that creaks in the wind. Antonio does not know it yet, but he has just joined the largest, most expensive, most ambitious construction project in Italian history, and it will quietly consume the rest of his life. March 2024. A train pulls into Caserta station just after noon. The platform is nearly empty. A few locals wait near the exit. Tourists with backpacks study maps on their phones. One passenger steps off slowly, carrying a worn leather bag and a notebook with frayed edges. Her name is Elena. She is 29 years old and works as an architectural photographer in Boston, though works might be too strong a word lately. 3 months ago, her largest client canceled a long-term contract. 2 months ago, her landlord raised the rent. 1 month ago, she maxed out a credit card to buy this plane ticket. Her parents think she is being reckless. Her friends think she is running away. Elena thinks she is finally doing something that matters. The notebook in her bag is full of sketches, palaces, estates, grand houses from across Europe. She has been collecting them since college. Versailles, Schönbrunn, Blenheim, each one carefully drawn, annotated, studied. But she has never seen Caserta in person. On paper, it is the biggest, bigger than Versailles, bigger than any royal residence still standing. 200 rooms, a facade that stretches longer than 3 football fields, gardens designed to rival anything in France. Elena has wanted to see it for years, but wanting and doing are different things. Life gets in the way, bills, Work, obligations, dreams stay in notebooks until now. She walks from the station toward the palace. The streets are quiet. Low buildings, small shops, a few cafes with outdoor tables. The town feels modest, almost sleepy. Then she turns a corner and stops. The palace rises in front of her like a wall, not a building, a wall. Endless windows, repeated arches, stone that goes on until it blurs at the edges of her vision. Elena has seen photographs. She has studied floor plans. She thought she understood the scale. She was wrong. For a moment, she just stands there, notebook forgotten in her hand. The palace does not feel welcoming. It feels overwhelming, impossible, almost aggressive in its size. A group of tourists walks past her, chatting in German. A guide leads a school group toward the main entrance. Everyone else seems comfortable, casual. They take photos and keep moving. Elena feels something different. She feels small, not in the usual way you feel small in front of a large building. Smaller than that. Like the palace is looking back at her, measuring her, asking a question she does not know how to answer. She walks closer. The entrance courtyard is massive. 4 wings surround a central space big enough to hold hundreds of people. The stone is pale, almost white in the afternoon sun. Every window is identical, every arch perfectly spaced. It is beautiful. It is also cold. Elena buys a ticket from a booth near the entrance. The woman behind the glass barely looks up. 15 euros. A small map printed on glossy paper. A reminder that the gardens close at sunset. Inside, entrance hall opens up into something that does not feel real. A staircase rises in front of her, splitting into 2 arms that curve upward toward a vaulted ceiling covered in fresco. Marble everywhere, light pouring through tall windows, statues watching from alcoves. A guided tour group gathers near the base of the stairs. Elena drifts closer, listening. The guide is a woman in her 50s speaking English with a thick Italian accent. She talks about King Charles, about architect Luigi Vanvitelli, about construction that lasted decades. 1,200 rooms, the guide says, gesturing upward. 18 years just to make it livable. Vanvitelli died before it was finished. His son completed the work. The tourists nod. A few take photos. The guide continues. The king wanted to rival Versailles. He wanted to show Europe that Naples was a great power. She pauses, then adds almost casually, of course, it nearly bankrupted the kingdom, but that is another story. Elena writes that down. Nearly bankrupted the kingdom. The tour group moves on. Elena stays behind, looking up at the staircase, at the frescoes, at the perfect marble columns. She thinks about her own debt, her canceled contracts, her parents asking when she will get serious about her career, and she wonders, what does it cost to build something this beautiful? The answer begins decades earlier, in a throne room where ambition weighs more than gold. The year is 1750. King Charles of Bourbon sits at a long table in the royal palace of Naples. Papers are spread before him, drawings, budgets, letters from architects across Italy. He is 33 years old and has been king since 1735, when Spanish troops marched into Naples and handed him the throne. His father is King Philip V of Spain. His mother comes from the Italian Farnese family. He grew up surrounded by palaces and paintings, with constant reminders that a ruler is measured not only by battles and treaties, but by what he leaves behind in stone. But Naples is not Spain, and Naples is certainly not France. That is the problem. When foreign ambassadors visit, they see a city busy, loud, full of life, but they do not see power. Not the kind that matters in European courts, not the kind that makes other kings nervous. Charles wants to change that, and he knows exactly how. Versailles haunts him, not as a memory, for he has never been there, but as an idea, a yardstick, a challenge. Every European monarch secretly measures themselves against Versailles, the palace built by Louis XIV to show the world what absolute power looks like. 100 rooms. Versailles has more beautiful gardens. Versailles' gardens stretch for miles. An impressive facade. Versailles makes other palaces look like country houses. For years, Charles has heard diplomats talk about Versailles with a mixture of respect and envy. He has read descriptions. He has studied drawings. And each time he has felt something between admiration, jealousy, and quiet anger. Why should France have the greatest palace in Europe? Why should Naples, an ancient kingdom with Greek and Roman roots, accept second place? The answer in his mind is simple. Naples should not settle. Charles makes a decision. He will build a palace that makes Versailles look modest, bigger, grander, more impressive in every measurable way. He summons Luigi Vanvitelli. Vanvitelli is no longer young. He is in his early 50s, trained in Rome, seasoned by large projects. He has built churches, aqueducts, and government buildings. He understands stone, water, and engineering. He also understands kings. When Charles shows him early sketches and explains his vision, Vanvitelli does not laugh. He does not say it is impossible. He listens. "I want it bigger than Versailles," Charles says. "More rooms, longer facades, gardens that prove Naples can rival any kingdom in Europe." Vanvitelli nods slowly. "This will require years, Your Majesty, decades perhaps." "I have time," Charles replies. "It will require extraordinary amounts of stone, labor, and money. Naples has resources." Vanvitelli does not argue. Kings do not hire architects to tell them no. They hire architects to turn desires into reality, no matter the cost. He spends months refining the plans. On paper, the palace takes shape. 5 floors, 1,200 rooms, 4 internal courtyards arranged in strict symmetry, a grand staircase rising through the center like a monument to geometry itself, a facade stretching over 800 feet, longer than Versailles. The numbers are staggering, but numbers are exactly what Charles wants. Numbers are proof. He also wants symbolism. The palace will not stand in Naples. The city is too crowded, too chaotic, too tied to old streets and old problems. Instead, it will rise in the countryside near Caserta, 20 miles to the north, far enough to feel separate from the city's noise, close enough to remain in control of it. This is important. Charles does not just want a home. He wants a statement, a place where the court can gather, where government can function, where foreign ambassadors arrive and immediately understand that Naples is not a minor power pretending to matter. Naples is real. Naples is permanent, and this palace will prove it. But there is another reason for the location, one Charles does not say out loud. Naples is dangerous. The city is crowded, unstable, quick to anger when bread prices rise or taxes increase. The revolt of 1647 is still remembered. Thousands of people armed with whatever they could grab rose against Spanish rule. Charles is Spanish by blood, but he rules Naples, and he knows the same streets that cheer a king can, in the right moment, turn into corridors of revolt. A palace in the countryside offers an answer: distance, space, control. If the people become angry, the court can retreat to Caserta, safe behind walls, protected by size. So the palace is both dream and fortress, symbol and escape plan. Vanvitelli understands this. He does not write it in his plans, but he designs walls thick enough to resist more than weather. In January 1752, construction begins, and Naples will never be the same. Before the marble could rise, the ground itself had to be forced into obedience. The site chosen for the palace was far from ideal. Swampland, difficult terrain, unstable earth. King Charles wanted grandeur, but Vanvitelli had to work with what nature provided. When a tourist once asked why better land wasn't chosen, the answer was simple. When a king decides, architects find solutions. In early spring of 1752, the first workers arrived at the construction site. They came from villages near Caserta, from coastal towns, and mountain settlements where thin soil barely fed families. They came because there was no other way to earn a living. Among them was Antonio, a stone cutter. He arrived on a cold morning carrying tools wrapped in cloth. His wife Maria watched him leave from the doorway of their small house. Their daughter Lucia was only 4 years old and did not understand why her father was leaving before sunrise. Antonio walked 2 hours to reach the site. When he arrived, hundreds of men were already working, digging trenches, hauling timber for scaffolding, marking foundation lines with chalk and string. The ground was soft, water pooling in low areas. Every step sank slightly into mud. Vanvitelli stood near the center of the chaos, pointing at drawings and shouting instructions. His fine clothes were stained and dusty, but he did not seem to care. Antonio joined a crew, digging foundation trenches. The work was simple to explain, but brutal to perform. Dig down until stable earth was reached, remove the mud, fill the space with stone and mortar, move over a few feet, and repeat. For weeks, they dug. The trenches grew deeper. Water seeped in faster than they could remove it. Workers baled buckets of muddy water all day, only to find the trenches refilled by morning. One man died in the first month when a trench collapsed. He was buried before anyone could pull him out. His body was found 2 days later. No one was sent home. No ceremony was held. The digging continued. Vanvitelli ordered pumps brought from Naples, wooden machines operated by men walking in circles, turning gears that lifted water from the trenches. The pumps helped, but not enough. The king visited in April. He rode in a carriage surrounded by guards and stepped out carefully, avoiding the worst patches of mud. He looked at the trenches, at the workers covered in dirt, at the wooden scaffolding rising like a skeleton. "When will the walls begin?" Charles asked. "Your Majesty, the foundations must be solid. If we rush, the palace will crack." Vanvitelli replied. Charles nodded, but did not look convinced. He did not order them to hurry and left after 20 minutes. The workers kept digging. By summer, the foundation trenches were complete. Stone began to arrive, massive blocks cut from quarries 10 miles away. Each block weighed hundreds of pounds. Teams of oxen dragged carts loaded with stone along dirt roads that barely held under the weight. Antonio was promoted to stonework. He was skilled with his hands, able to shape blocks with precision, trim edges until they fit tightly. The pay was slightly better, just enough to send a little extra money home, but the work was harder. Stone dust filled the air, coating his clothes and lungs, making every breath heavier. Other workers coughed constantly. A few left, unable to continue. New faces appeared to replace them. The first walls rose slowly, brick and stone layered with mortar. Thick walls, stronger and higher than anything Antonio had built before. Van Vitelli walked the site every day, checking measurements, adjusting plans. He yelled when something was wrong and praised when the work was good. The workers learned to read his moods, to avoid him on bad days, and to work faster when his shadow fell across their section. At night, Antonio slept in a temporary barracks near the site. Wooden walls, straw mattresses, 50 men crowded into a space meant for 30. He wrote letters to Maria, short, careful messages. The work was hard. The pay was steady. He missed Lucia. Maria wrote back, bread is more expensive. Taxes have increased again. She is managing, but it is difficult. Antonio read her letters by candlelight, folding them carefully and keeping them close to his chest. Outside, the palace grew slowly, brick by brick, stone by stone, and beneath the rising walls, the swamp waited, patient, heavy, hungry. The palace was growing, but so was the weight of the lives it consumed, lives that history often forgot. By 1755, the walls of Caserta were rising, 4 full stories in some sections. The main courtyard was taking shape, framed by columns and arches reaching toward the open air. The work had changed Antonio. His hands were maps of cuts and scars. His back ached every evening. Each morning, he coughed thick and heavy from the stone dust that never truly left his lungs. Many men had gone. Some died in accidents. Others gave up and returned to their villages. But Antonio stayed because Maria needed the money, because Lucia needed food, because leaving now would mean admitting that 3 grinding years were for nothing. The workers lived in a permanent camp now. Wooden buildings, more solid than the first barracks, but still crowded. 200 men slept, ate, snored, and argued in a space that smelled of sweat, smoke, and whetstone. At night, when the work stopped, some men drank cheap wine. Others played cards for coins they could not afford to lose. A few wrote letters they could not afford to send. Antonio did something different. He took a nail, sharpened to a point, and found a quiet corner in one of the service corridors, a place where the plaster was still soft enough to mark. There, he carved his initials into the wall, A.M. Antonio Moretti. He worked slowly, carefully, pressing harder with each stroke, making sure the letters cut deep enough to outlive him. Another worker, Giovanni, watched from nearby. He was younger, maybe 20, with a crooked nose from a fight years ago. "Why bother?" Giovanni asked. "No one will see it." Antonio did not look up. Someone might. The king, the nobles, they do not walk these halls. Someone else then. Giovanni shrugged. He did not understand. But the next night, he carved his own initials nearby, just in case. Over the following months, more marks appeared. Initials, dates, a few full names. Some men carved them into hidden corners. Others scratched them where fresh mortar would soon seal the wall and hide the letters forever. They did it because the palace was growing too large to remember individuals. Thousands of workers now, stonemasons, carpenters, painters, laborers, hauling bricks until their shoulders bled through their shirts. Nobles visited occasionally. They strolled through the rising courtyards, praising the proportions. They discussed which suites would be theirs when the palace was complete. They stepped around workers as if they were part of the scaffolding. Van Vitelli knew the men by skill, not by name. He called them the masons, the plasterers, the crew on the east wing. He measured days by progress, not by faces. The king had visited 3 times in 3 years. Each time, he walked quickly, asked when it would be finished, listened to reassurances, and left in a cloud of dust and horses. So the workers carved their initials. Small rebellions, quiet proof that they existed. Antonio finished his mark and stepped back. The letters looked rough, uneven, but they were there. He touched them once with the tips of his fingers, then walked away. March 2024. Elena runs her fingers over the faint initials AM. She does not know who Antonio Moretti was. She does not know if he lived to see the palace completed, if he went home, if he died on this site or in some village no one wrote about. But she knows one thing with certainty: he was here. And for one brief moment in a dark corridor, he wanted the future to know that. She pulls out her notebook, sketches the initials quickly, and writes the location. Service stairway, east wing, lower level. A security guard appears at the top of the stairs. Miss, the tour group stays on the main floors. Sorry, Elena says. I got lost. The guard nods toward the stairs. Elena climbs back up, glancing once over her shoulder at the marks on the wall. The palace suddenly feels different, not just marble and symmetry, not just a king's dream made solid. It is a monument built on lives, thousands of them. And most of those lives left nothing behind, except initials carved in places no one was supposed to look. She thinks about her own work. Photographs of buildings, clean lines, beautiful facades, perfect light. She is almost never asked who built them, who hauled the stone, who fell from the scaffolding, who died making something she now frames as art. The guard watches her until she returns to the main corridor. She slips into another tour group, standing at the back, listening without really hearing. Her notebook stays open to the sketch of AM, and she decides this story is not about a king anymore. The story is no longer just about kings and palaces. It is about the cost of ambition, the price paid by those who build and those who serve. By 1756, 4 years into construction, the palace was consuming money faster than Naples could provide. King Charles sat hunched over ledgers in his office in Naples. Columns of ink marched down the pages. The numbers were worse than he expected. Stone costs exceeded projections. Wages climbed every year. The great aqueduct needed to feed the fountains had become a second massive project, demanding engineers, labor, and cash. His treasurer stood nearby, sweating despite the cool morning air. "Your Majesty," he began carefully, "the expenses exceed the current budget by—" "I know what they exceed," Charles interrupted. "Find more money. We have raised taxes twice already. The people will adjust." The treasurer closed his mouth. Kings like Charles were not accustomed to the word no. He bowed and left. The next month, new taxes appeared. Levies on olive oil, grain, tools, cloth, and nearly everything else. The royal accountants could measure and count. Each rate was small on paper. None looked disastrous alone, but they did not come alone. In villages across the kingdom, people noticed. Bread cost a little more. So did wine. So did the fee to register a birth or a marriage. A few extra coins here. A small increase there. A slow tightening, coin by coin. Maria, Antonio's wife, felt it immediately. She bought less meat, watered down the soup, told Lucia they were saving money for something special, though she had no idea what that something special could be. Antonio's wages had not increased. Every month, he sent home the same amount. Every month, that amount bought less. He did not complain. Complaining changed nothing. The palace did not care about bread prices. The palace only cared about stone. By 1758, the walls were nearly complete. 5 stories high in most sections. Windows cut into the facade in perfect endless rows. The courtyards were defined now. Massive open spaces where workers gathered for instructions each morning. Van Vitelli was aging. He was 58 years old. His back hurt. His eyes blurred when he bent over drawings in dim light. But he did not slow down. The king wanted faster progress. Van Vitelli wanted perfection. Those two clocks did not tick at the same speed. One afternoon, Charles arrived without warning. He walked through the main courtyard with an entourage of nobles trailing behind like brightly dressed shadows. They pointed at cornices and arches, murmuring about proportions and symmetry, as if they truly understood what they were praising. Charles stopped in front of Van Vitelli. "When will it be ready?" he asked. Van Vitelli did not hesitate. "Another decade, Your Majesty, perhaps longer." Charles's face tightened. "That is unacceptable." "That is reality," Van Vitelli replied. The nobles fell silent. No one talked to the king like that, but Van Vitelli was not a courtier. He had spent years on this site. He knew every wall, every crack, every place where the swamp still pushed back from below. He knew that if they rushed now, the palace would leak and shift and betray them long after everyone there was dead. "Your Majesty," Van Vitelli said, "we are building the largest palace in Europe. That cannot be done quickly. It can only be done correctly." Charles studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded once and walked away. The nobles followed, robes brushing the dusty ground. One leaned toward another, whispering something sharp. Another laughed under his breath. Van Vitelli turned back to his drawings. That night, Antonio and a dozen other workers sat outside the barracks. They shared bread and weak wine. Someone mentioned the king's visit. "He looked angry," one man said. "He is always angry." Another replied, "Rich men are angry when they do not get what they want fast enough." Antonio said nothing. He was too tired to waste words on kings, but he thought about the taxes, about Maria's last letter, about the way Lucia's clothes no longer fit, and how Maria wrote that she could not afford new ones yet. He thought about the marble being installed in the royal apartments, rare stone shipped from quarries hundreds of miles away. Each slab cost more than he earned in a year. The contrast was obvious. It sat in his chest every night like a stone of its own. But what could he do? Stop working? Go home to a village where there was no work at all? So he stayed like everyone else. The palace rose, stone and debt layered together. In Naples, the court grew more nervous. Reports arrived from the provinces, complaints about taxes, angry talk in market squares, small protests that scattered when soldiers appeared. Nothing serious yet, but the tension was building. Charles heard the reports. He did not change course. The palace was too far along. It was his legacy now, his proof that Naples mattered, and legacies, he believed, were worth any cost. March 2024. Elena sat in a cafe near the palace, drinking a small cup of espresso and scrolling through articles about Bourbon finances on her phone. The numbers were staggering. Millions of ducats poured into construction over decades. She thought about Antonio's initials, about the workers who built this place while their family skipped meat, watered soup, counted coins. She thought about her own debt, the credit cards stretched to pay for this trip, the contracts she lost, the rent she could not keep up with in Boston. Different scale, same pattern. Someone always pays, and it is almost never the people at the top. She finished her coffee and walked back toward the palace. The facade glowed in the afternoon sun, perfect and untouchable. Underneath, she now knew the foundation was built on more than stone. The palace has witnessed the rise and fall of empires, its walls silently observing the shifting tides of power. By 1799, the palace was 47 years old. It had already seen 3 different flags fly over its grand entrance. Ferdinand IV fled Naples in December 1798 as French armies marched south, revolutionary slogans echoing across Italy. The king, his family, and his most loyal nobles escaped to Sicily on British ships. The palace stayed behind. In January 1799, French troops entered Caserta. They did not loot or burn the palace. They simply took possession. The Parthenopean Republic was proclaimed, a fragile experiment that lasted only 6 months before the old monarchy returned with brutal revenge. During those 6 months, the palace was no longer a royal residence. It became a military headquarters. Rosa, now 41 years old, had worked there for 24 years. She had cleaned the same halls, washed the same linens, and scrubbed the same floors under 3 different regimes. The French officers treated servants differently than the Bourbon nobles did, not gently, but differently. They sometimes spoke directly to servants instead of through stewards. They issued orders without as much ceremony. A few even said, "Please." Rosa did not trust any of it. Politeness from powerful men was still power, just wrapped in a softer tone. The French turned the palace into a headquarters. Military maps spread across tables where nobles once played cards. Officers slept in royal bedrooms. Soldiers drilled in courtyards designed for carriages and processions. The transformation looked violent, even though almost nothing was broken. Gold-framed mirrors reflected uniforms instead of silk coats. The echo of marching boots replaced music. The servants adjusted. They always did. Power changed hands. Orders changed wording. Work stayed the same. By summer, the Parthenopean Republic fell. Ferdinand returned with an army. The reprisals were savage. Thousands were executed. Suspected revolutionaries hunted through the streets of Naples and dragged to the gallows. The palace stood untouched. Walls did not care who claimed them. Ferdinand moved back into his apartments. The French maps disappeared. The old routines reappeared. Nobles returned to their salons. Servants fell back into familiar tasks. Rosa noticed one simple truth. The marble she polished was exactly the same. The floors did not remember which flag flew outside or which anthem echoed in the courtyard. The next turn of the wheel came in 1806. Napoleon's brother, Joseph Bonaparte, became king of Naples. 2 years later, in 1808, Napoleon's brother-in-law, Joachim Murat, took the throne. The palace adjusted again. New courtiers, new uniforms, new languages spoken in the halls. Rosa was older now. Her hands were permanently bent from decades of scrubbing. Her back ached when she climbed the servants' stairs, but she still worked. She trained younger maids. She knew the palace better than most nobles who glided through it in embroidered shoes. Murat ruled until 1815. Then Napoleon fell. The Bourbons returned again. Ferdinand, now styling himself Ferdinand I of the two Sicilies, reclaimed his throne. The palace had seen French revolutionaries, Napoleonic kings, and Bourbon restorations. Each regime tweaked the decor, new portraits on the walls, new furniture in the salons, new styles in fashion, but the structure stayed, and so did the servants. Antonio's son, also named Antonio, worked at the palace now. His father died in 1778, crushed when scaffolding collapsed during late-stage construction. The younger Antonio was born in the workers' camp in the shadow of unfinished walls. He had never known any other home. This Antonio was not a stonecutter. He was a groundskeeper. He tended the gardens, trimmed hedges, swept gravel paths, and cleared fallen branches after storms. He spent his days under the open sky rather than under dust-filled ceilings. Healthier work than his father had. He did not think deeply about politics. Kings came, kings fell, flags changed color, roses still needed pruning. He carved no initials into walls. He wrote no letters that survive. He simply worked. This was the quiet reality of the palace. For every noble scheming for influence, there were dozens of servants and workers keeping the place alive. They did not appear in history books. No artist painted their portraits. Their names were not listed in official records. Yet without them, the palace would be nothing but cold stone and empty rooms. By 1820, the Bourbon Restoration looked solid. Ferdinand ruled again. The court appeared stable. On the surface, the palace finally functioned as it was meant to, a symbol of royal authority, a center of government, a statement to Europe that the old order endured. Underneath, pressure was building. Movements for Italian unification gained strength. Secret societies met in back rooms. Pamphlets circulated. People whispered about constitutions and rights. The palace, massive and unmoving, sat in the middle of these currents. It did not know. It did not care. It endured. March 2024. Elena read a timeline on a plaque in one of the halls. The dates blurred together. 1799, 1806, 1815, 1860. Each year marked a regime change, a shift in who sat on the throne. She thought about Rosa, about young Antonio, about all the workers and servants who passed through these halls, while governments rose and collapsed. Their lives were not shaped by grand speeches or royal decrees. They were shaped by daily survival, by wages that never quite stretched far enough, by bodies worn down stair by stair, stone by stone. The nobles who lived here were remembered. Their portraits hung in gilded frames. Their names appeared in plaques and guidebooks. The servants were erased. Their faces unknown, their stories untold. Elena took a photograph of the timeline plaque. But what she really wanted to photograph was something that no longer existed. The attic where Rosa slept, the barracks where Antonio's father took his last breath, the service corridors where invisible people walked invisible paths for entire lifetimes. Those spaces were gone, or locked behind closed doors, or turned into storage rooms with no names on them. History keeps what it decides to value. And for a long time, it valued the nobles. The rest dissolved into silence.